Well, this is a case study that compares the United States and Kenya to examine the role of sugar as a dominant driver of modern cancer patterns. The central hypothesis is that chronic population level sugar exposure creates a shared metabolic environment that promotes cancer. It promotes cancer development across diverse genetic, cultural, and dietary backgrounds. Kenya provides a unique natural experiment that strengthens this hypothesis. In the United States, refined sugar became a common dietary component around the 18th century, 1800, and over the next century, per capita sugar consumption steadily increased. Cancer was first systematically documented in 1863, and diabetes became a recognized public health condition by 1916. The long interval between sugar exposure and widespread metabolic disease reflects gradual generational metabolic disruption. And by the late 20th century, cancer incidence rose across all demographics consistent with prolonged exposure to refined carbohydrates and chronic hyperinsulinemia. Now, Kenya presents a compressed and clearer timeline. Refined sugar was introduced during the colonial period in the early 20th century, but remained largely confined to urban elites. Widespread access occurred in the 1970s when sugar became affordable and culturally embedded, most notably through sweetened tea, which is consumed daily across the country. Cancer cases began appearing in hospital-based records around 1980s, followed by diabetes documentation in the mid-80s. By 1990s and 2000, cancer incidence increased broadly and no longer followed clear socioeconomic, geographic, or tribal patterns. Kenya's strength as evidence lies in its internal diversity. The country has more than 50 tribes, each with distinct traditional diet, lifestyle, and environmental exposures. Oil consumption varies widely. Meat intake differs by tribe and region. Staples starches range from maize to millet to sorghum and also differs by tribe. Water access, food preservation, and physical activity patterns are also not uniform. These variables differ significantly across tribes and should, under classic epidemiological reasoning, produce different cancer patterns. Yet, one exposure is nearly universal across tribes. Sugar consumed through tea, sweetened tea, cuts across geography, tribe, income, and age. It is consumed multiple times daily, often starting in childhood. This creates a uniform metabolic exposure in an otherwise heterogeneous population. As cancer incidents become more widespread in Kenya, it followed this shared exposure rather than tribal dietary distinction. From a biological perspective, chronic sugar intake drives repeated glucose and insulin spikes. Over time, this produces insulin-resistant compensatory insulinemia, elevated insulin-like growth factor, signaling chronic inflammation and oxidative stress. These conditions promote cellular proliferation, inhibit apoptosis, and facilitate genomic instability. Cancer cells then exploit this environment through glucose-dependent metabolic pathways, which is why they demonstrate intensive glucose uptake on PET imaging. The comparative insight is this. The United States demonstrates the long-term effect of sustained sugar exposure across generations. Kenya demonstrates the same effect on a compressed timeline in a population with wide dietary diversity but a shared sugar exposure. The convergence of cancer patterns across Kenya's tribe, despite difference in oil, meat, starch, water access, points to sugar as the most consistent and plausible common driver. This case study supports the hypothesis that sugar acts as a population-level metabolic disruptor, creating conditions that both initiate and accelerate cancer development. Kenya's tribal diversity strengthens rather than weakens this argument by functioning as an internal control. When most variables differ, but one exposure is shared and disease patterns converge, that shared exposure deserves primary scrutiny. When cancer patterns becomes uniform across genetically and culturally diverse population, investigators should focus on what is metabolically common, not what is culturally different. In this case, sugar is the most consistent common denominator in Kenya. Thank you so much. And my name is Robert. God bless you.